Show no signs of confusion and strain. Instead, be gay, happy, cheerful, and confident. You carry out a deed that God loves and approves of. Then the day will come when you will be in paradise, with the black-eyed virgins and with God's approval. And smile death into the face, young warrior, for you shall enter into the eternal gardens. Several days after the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001, a teacher by the name of Abd Samad hears on the radio some staggering news on his way home. A Frenchman is suspected of being one of the assassins of September 11th, but he was said to have been arrested weeks before the assault. The name of the man? Zacarias Moussaoui. Abd Samad knows him at once, because he is his brother. 1,000 memories, 1,000 questions. Zacarias Moussaoui, the young man from France, a terrorist, willing to kill the innocent. We now try to understand and to follow his tracks.
Moi, ce que j'ai pu constater, c'est son changement au fur et à mesure du temps.
He changed in the course of time. In 1992, he went to England. There he met people who told him of jihad, of defending Islam, and that Islam should obtain new laurels, as if it could be besmirched by anyone. These people have only one goal, promoting their own interests.
En réalité, ces gens-là, ils n'ont qu'un but, c'est servir leurs intérêts.
Abd Samad writes a book on the life of his brother from a very personal point of view. He presents it to the media. Shortly afterwards, he hides from the public because, according to his mother, he belongs to an extremist Islamic organization. Some people believe he is in Lebanon. He has broken all contacts with his family. Memories of better times. Aisha El-Wafi raised 4 children. For the time being, it looks as though she's lost both sons to extremist thinking.
Moi, j'aime mes enfants, mais ils sont en train de se déchirer pour la religion.
I love my children, but they were about to destroy themselves because of religion. Abd Samad reproached Zacarias for not being a true Muslim. Zacarias said the same of Abd Samad. This is certainly not what I wanted, a quarrel inside the family because of religion.
Mon but, moi, c'est pas mon désir. Moi, j'étais déchirée entre eux. J'aurais pas souhaité ça. Tango. Tango. Tango.
Aisha El-Wafi is deeply worried about Zacarias, who has been in prison awaiting his trial for 4 years. Tango Tango, he had called himself at the American flight school, where he wanted to be trained as a pilot. He became a suspect and was arrested on grounds of a visa violation weeks before September 11th. His mother travels to the USA, visits a court hearing, wants to support him. He acts stubborn and quarrelsome in court, states for the records that he wishes all Americans and Israelis to be wiped out. He confesses to being an Al-Qaeda terrorist and to have participated in planning an assault, although not for September 11th. Yet he may be facing a death sentence in the USA for only planning to commit acts of terror, hijack a plane, destroy and use it as a means of mass destruction. According to his mother, he should be protected from American justice and from himself.
Guilty? He is guilty of belonging to this movement, Al-Qaeda, but he is not guilty of the September the 11th attacks. He had nothing to do with it. But yes, he belongs to Al-Qaeda, that's for sure. They're a gang of criminals.
7th of July 2005. Islamic terror in Europe. London is bleeding. The terrorists, fellow countrymen, Britons. Europeans like Zacarias Moussaoui. What motivates them to kill?
Zacarias was a child like all others. When he was a baby, he never woke up at night. He was a pretty child, but fat. By 9 months, he already weighed 15 kilos. We had bad experiences in our life, we 5, the 4 children and I, experienced a lot of violence from the father. Zacarias was still a baby, but he saw and heard it. He was there. But he was not beaten up because we left the father when Zacarias was 2.5 years old.
The parents are from Morocco. After the divorce, the mother enters into a new relationship. Years later, the father tries to re-establish contact with the children.
Moussaoui. Omar. Là. Là.
There are conflicts. The young family is poor, but Aisha El Wafi works hard. She becomes a telecom employee, a good career since her modest start in France.
I haven't changed. I'm still the same.
In the apartment building in Narbonne, where the family lives in the early years, ethnic groups fight each other. In school, the children are met with prejudices because of the colour of their skin. Being strangers and staying strangers leave marked traces, especially Zacarias, who suffers under these conditions. Where can we integrate ourselves, he once asked his mother. After all, we are Frenchmen.
Mes enfants, ils ont affronté dans la rue les mots durs, sale négro, sale arabe, qu'est-ce que tu fais là, retourne chez toi.
In the street, my children heard harsh words. Dirty nigger, dirty Arab, what are you doing here? Although they were born here in France and can't go anywhere else. When they were about 16, 17, they often returned from the disco before 12 o'clock. Then I knew they had problems again. In school it was the same. They once knocked out one of Zacarias' teeth because he didn't give something to a child when playing. This racism was in everyday life, time and again. You must have experienced it in order to understand it.
Et ça, il faut le vivre pour comprendre.
Only later on do the children learn about their religion. As youngsters, the mother says, they refuse to even talk about religion. In their opinion, Islam was not French but antiquated in the world of their Moroccan grandparents. Only as a young adult does Zacarias Moussaoui learn to pray. Sheikh Mohammed Khattabi, the imam of the new Ibn Rushd Mosque in Montpellier, knows well about the problems of young Muslims.
Est-ce que le problème du racisme, l'exclusion, manque de travail,
the problem of racism, the exclusion, the feeling of having a second nationality, although one is a citizen like all others. You want to have a flat, but you're not entitled to. You want to work, but you're not allowed to. Probably there were several circumstances that caused Zacarias Moussaoui to do what he possibly did. I could always name cases of young people who suffered under similar circumstances, but who reacted differently. This puts the theory of exclusion into perspective. In any case, there is this unease, an unease the Islamic youth feels and experiences.
But the reasons for the violence are not only to be found in Western countries. They have a lot to do with the conflicts in the Arab world. Cairo, the capital of Egypt, is the cradle of the political Islamic movement, the Islamism. Here, the Society of Muslim Brothers was founded in 1928. Islam was to become the sole foundation of state and society. The consequences were fierce conflicts with the potentates, arrests, torture, and executions. A sore dream of a better world. And even today, a topical search for identity as an answer to secularization and globalization. Today, the Muslim Brothers, although officially prohibited, are an important factor in Egypt. They demand political freedom and democracy based on Islam. Blood and life we give for Islam, they chant. Montpellier in southern France, a city of students and tourists. Zacarias and his brother live here. According to his brother, it was here where Zacarias Moussaoui first met Islamists. On the university campus, he makes the acquaintance of the Muslim Brothers and of so-called Wahhabis, representatives of a particularly strict interpretation of the law from Saudi Arabia. The university, a place of ideas, informed thinking, and juvenile vehemence. Zacarias hears for the first time of the religiously motivated fight, the jihad, of divine law, the Sharia, of the struggle for the Islamic State and true Islam, and he hears of the question of violence. The Islamists dream of a counter-world, of a state in line with divine law, without oppression, without corruption, without poverty. Instead, pious and puritanical. Government and contemporaries are considered ignoramuses and disbelievers, as if Prophet Muhammad had never lived. Some are impatient. Militant groups form. They want to control the changes. A coup d'etat is envisaged, a jihad against the ruling class. In the underground, the idea of violence shapes and narrows their thinking.
Ich glaube, in allen solchen Fällen, und das spielt sich ja in allen Religionen ab, gibt es einen
I think in all these cases, and it is also known of other religions, that there is a loss of identity that leads to an ideologization of religion. Religion is treated like an ideology. It empties its spirituality.
A hadith, a word passed down by the Prophet, plays a major role in ideologies, says Murad Hoffman, who converted to Islam in 1980 and has since been one of the most important Muslim voices in Germany. The Muslims, so it's said, are to fight the evil.
Und zwar, wenn man kann, mit der Hand.
And if possible with the hand, if not with the tongue, and if that is not possible either, at least with the heart. Thus many young Muslims conclude that they are not only entitled, but even obliged to fight the evil with their hands whenever they can.
Bösem entgegenzutreten, mit der Hand, wenn es geht, wo auch immer.
On the 6th of October 1981, State President Anwar al-Sadat is murdered. Two militant groups had planned the assassination, Gama Islamiyah and Al-Jihad. Further assaults are to follow. Montasa al-Zayat is a lawyer in Cairo and an Islamist. He fights for the re-Islamization of society as well. Yet he has renounced violence. He focuses on dawah, enunciation. This had not always been the case. After the assassination of Sadat, he spent 3 years in prison for being an accessory. There he met the leader of the group Al-Jihad, Ayman Zawahiri, to whom he dedicated a book. Zawahiri has not given up the fight. He has extended the field of action. He is the second man in Al-Qaeda.
أنا بختلف مع الشيخ أيمن ظاهري في المنهج.
I differ from Sheikh Zahawi because I believe in peaceful work, in the peaceful jihad. I'm politically active, I criticise the government. I'm also responsible for my opinion, even though I have to pay for it with my freedom. I believe I cannot implement my goals by violence, and that the armed combat, bloodshed and killing will only make me lose the liking of many. Zawahiri sees his goal in overthrowing governments by force. I, however, take the view that it would be better to win broad masses of the population for our cause.
Resting on the Nile, we are on a journey to try to comprehend Zacarias Moussaoui's motivation. We speak with Muslims and Islamists in Cairo, in the Middle East, and in London. Islam is a seemingly simple answer to difficult questions. Zacarias also hears reproaches directed at the West. Does he not support the unpopular regimes impeding an Islamic renaissance? In 1992, Zacarias comes to London, all alone and seeking contacts. Many Muslims live here, among them Islamists and activists. They fight for political change in their home countries. As the July attacks show, some have crossed the borderline, says the London correspondent of the Arabian television station Al Jazeera.
Everybody expected this. London is now on the front line. And officially, things have changed. There's a new law now. What I find interesting again is that the so-called preachers of hate, rightly described, have been allowed for so many years to disseminate their message for their followers in London, taking advantage of the accommodating atmosphere, climate, traditionally known about London, and basically forming what you would probably describe as, well, the mobilizers.
One of these radical Islamists with anti-Western views is Sheikh Omar Bakri from Syria. Repeatedly, he said in public that he wished the Islamic flag would fly over London. In an interview with us a few days before the attacks, he blatantly praises the September 11th terrorists. Meanwhile, he has now left England and is not allowed to return.
9/11 itself, it changed everything. And those magnificent 19 terrorists, if you like to call them like this, they say to the whole world, enough is enough. We can't take it anymore. And I think the lesson, it was very painful for many people, whether those who are involved in 9/11 or those who have been caught in 9/11 or those who have been traced after 9/11 because of their own strong views. And you and me and everybody suffer from 9/11. So there's no doubt about that. Having I said that, I'm not saying they are terrorists in any way to be bad word, because terrorism in Islam has two connotations. One it's pro-life, one against life. One praised by God, one against command of God. George Bush is terrorist and Osama bin Laden is terrorist. And each one believe he terrorized the opposite party who are naughty one or bad one. So now both of them are terrorists. One of them praised by God, one of them dispraised by God. So which one you want yourself to figure out and check and study the command of God, you will know which one his terrorism is praised by Almighty God and which one is praised Almighty dollar.
At the South Bank University, Zacarias Moussaoui successfully passes his studies in economics. During this period, his contacts to a fanatical Wahhabi group must have intensified. He wants to found a trading company for business transactions between England and the Orient. This is what he tells his mother, who he visits in Narbonne in 1997.
quand je l'ai vu en 97, je trouvais que il devenait un musulman.
When, after many years, I met him again in 97, he had become a Muslim. My father, my grandfather, my mother, they'd all been good Muslims who prayed, who did not speak evil about others, who tried to be honest and to understand one another. In 1997, when Zacarias came, he prayed, but he did not ask me why I was not wearing a scarf. He asked me no questions at all. I was glad that my son had become better behaved and that he prayed. He even asked my forgiveness for all he had done as a young lad. I did not foresee the extremist in him.
J'ai pas vu venir les extrémistes après. J'ai pas vu ça.
But with his brother in Montpellier, the quarrel for the true Islam leads to a breakup. Abd Samad describes how Zacarias becomes alienated, how Zacarias reproaches him and his sisters for being disbelievers. He hardly communicates with them at all. Little is known about his life in London. Abd Samad tries to talk his brother out of the sectarian way of thinking, as he writes in his book, but no word that he himself is a follower of extremist ideas, as his mother says. In any case, Zacarias, who knew so little about Islam, has turned into a pious Wahhabite in London.
Pour moi, un mouvement a toujours vécu son contexte.
I take the view a movement should have its place in its environment. The Wahhabists formed in Saudi Arabia in the 18th century. Their founder, Muhammad al-Wahhab, lived in his environment, his context, his milieu. Attempting to convert the same ideas into a Western environment is a severe mistake. Yet no matter which extremist movement is concerned, young people can easily be allured by any movement. If you feel the emptiness, a vacuum, a weakness, you're willing to clutch to the smallest straw.
Islam has many aspects. Yet whoever considers his own truth as the absolute one can only regard somebody with a differing view as a kafir, a disbeliever.
Dies ist eine ganz schlimme Sache, die nennt man Takfir. Jemand zum Kafir machen.
There's a wicked thing called takfir, meaning to make someone a kafir.
Mit krassen Worten verboten, dass ein
It is strictly forbidden in the Quran that one Muslim denies the other Muslim being a Muslim, as only God is entitled to make this judgment. And the Quran reads, the man who makes this judgment will be stricken by this judgment himself and will cease to be a Muslim. And yet this method called takfir, which means to deny someone to be a Muslim, has become an epidemic in individual militant Islamic groups.
Muslimischen Gruppen, islamistischen Gruppen.
What to do about the extremist menace? In April of 2005, the first Austrian Imam conference in the old Vienna City Hall distanced itself expressly from extremism, fanaticism and violence. The first remedy against it, integration.
Also ich glaube, wir müssen erstmal
I believe we must first attempt to realize one thing, that Muslims will feel at home in this country, with all rights but also obligations, to avoid the permanent feeling of being outsiders or discriminated or without any rights, etc. These thoughts can be fertile soil for such ideologies, and therefore I think Austrian politics are very reasonable politics treating Muslims sensitively. On the other hand, it is for Muslims a great challenge how to be able to integrate themselves into this society.
Auf der anderen Seite ist das für die Muslime eine große Herausforderung, wie sie sich in diese Gesellschaft einbringen.
And we try to develop something in this field, like a Muslim identity in Austria, and, as we talk of Europe today, in Europe. This means it ought not to be a contradiction being an Austrian, a European Muslim committed to his home country, that is also my home country, and with all rights and obligation, even if I live in a predominantly Christian or non-Christian society, that is to say, not an Islamic one. It may not be a contradiction. This Muslim experience to live in a non-Muslim society is something like a new experience.
Sheikh Adnan Ibrahim tries in his Vienna Shura Mosque to keep the outlook of his believers wide and to preserve it from narrowness and fundamentalism. Religion is not only what is written in holy books, but also, especially, what is understood and interpreted from them. Sheikh Adnan has been living in Austria for 14 years, but if it is about his religion, he wishes to speak in Arabic in order to be precise. We ask him about the Quran. Does it call for the fight against the disbelievers?
The foremost principle of the Quran is that we only fight against those who attack us, whoever they might be. The Quran says, fight those who attack you, and God Almighty says, do not start the fight. God does not like the aggressor.
When Zacarias Moussaoui starts to show interest in Islam, he shows solidarity with suffering Muslims, sees Muslims fighting in many places in the world, hears of mujahideen and jihad fighters in Bosnia, Chechnya, Kashmir and the Middle East. Is Islam more belligerent than other religions? Is it a teaching of violence? We ask Azam al-Tamimi, director of the Institute for Islamic Political Thinking in London. He is from Hebron in Palestine and has witnessed the Muslim fight there.
Well, to start with, I don't believe that there are religious reasons for violence. Violence is motivated by political, economic or social factors. But religion is a potent explainer as well as justifier. If you decide to pursue your cause, which is political, economic or social, through the use of violence because you believe other means no longer work, then you have to have an ideological justification for what you're doing. So there is no ideology for violence. There is no religion for terrorism. There are purely mundane factors.
Ramallah on the West Bank, the hustle and bustle at the checkpoint on the way to nearby Jerusalem. Fence and wall separate Israelis and Palestinians who have such a hard time finding peace. Despite recent progress in the peace process, the Middle East conflict represents a severe wound in the relation of Arab countries and Muslims to the West. The Islamic resistance organization Hamas, which had its origin in the Muslim Brotherhood, is in the first line of the fight against the occupation. Also, women are militarized here. Religious arguments add to this. Death loses its terror if it promises happiness. Whoever dies in combat becomes a martyr, a shaheed. Jihad means everything for Muslims, according to Youssef Abu Humas, mother of 10 and enthusiastic grandmother. To be with the children, to teach them praying, to clean the house, to be a good person. Any endeavor to please God. And the armed fight for God and fatherland is part of it. For Youssef, it is much too silent in the house. She lives together with one daughter-in-law and 3 grandchildren. Their sons fought in the Intifada, the fight against Israel. 6 of them are in prison, sentenced to several thousand years of imprisonment. One of them was killed by special task forces. He is a shaheed, a martyr.
Shaheed is a martyr at God's side. He committed himself to defend his country, fight its enemies, so his death is martyrdom. We have neither Apache helicopters, nor rockets, nor cannons. Only our shaheeds who fight occupation.
If it is true what the faith says, the son who died in combat is better off than his brothers who are in prison. As immediately after his death, he has the privilege to be with God, escorted by 72 virgins, as the prophet predicts, and thus he can do good things for his family.
He becomes an advocate for 70 family members on Judgment Day. And it was an experience for me when I saw him after he had been murdered. I was overwhelmed by the light shining from his deformed face. I started to rejoice, although I was very sad that my son was lying dead in front of me. I felt joy, and I was proud that he had experienced his fate. He had always wished to die like that. The earth is perishable, but paradise is eternal. I remembered that I often asked him, "Don't you want to get married?" He answered, "How? I have neither house, nor money, nor job, nor future." Now he lives with God and will be our advocate.
The green flag of Hamas waves over Ramallah's old town. Shaheeds are revered. They're part of Ramallah's face. Some kill themselves as human bombs in their attacks, leaving behind death, wounds and devastation. Not only among soldiers in the occupied countries, but also among civilians in the middle of Israel. Suicide bombing is not an Islamic invention. It was first introduced by a Marxist terror organization in the Middle East. When in 1993 Hamas took it up, Muslims had fierce debates about it, as the Quran expressly prohibits suicide. We asked the leading Hamas representative for his arguments.
We must differentiate between two things. Someone killing himself because he wants to depart this life, because he has problems, personal, social or psychological. This is known the world over, in Europe, in America, everywhere. And this we strictly protest. Whoever kills himself under these circumstances is a suicide. But the istishadi, who carries out a martyr operation, is someone sacrificing himself voluntarily for a noble aim, defending his country, its shrines, its faith, its belongings. He sacrifices his life for a noble cause. This is the istishadi martyr.
Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Portraits of Shaheeds with their spiritual leaders, the Imams, characterize the streets of the quarter controlled by the Shiite Hezbollah. In a conversation with us, Hezbollah boss Hassan Nasrallah, who seldom gives interviews, emphasizes that the fight is entirely in line with the Quran.
Our fight was a jihad in self-defense against the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. Within the framework of self-defense of our countries, our people, our sovereignty, and our independence, our dignity, our natural resources, violence may be used. Not only is this in line with the religious precept, but it also conforms to law, even pursuant to international law and anything human beings can agree upon.
The Hezbollah, Party of God and supported by Iran, was founded as a resistance against the Israeli occupation of Lebanon in 1982. It is considered a terror organization by Israel and the USA. However, in Lebanon, it is represented by one member in parliament. According to the Quran, civilians may in no way become victims of assaults. Hezbollah as well as Hamas have vehemently condemned the attacks of September 11th as well as those of Madrid and London, and they condemn terror activities of Islamic extremists in Iraq directed against civilians.
نقول قتل الناس في العراق كقتل الناس في لندن كقتل الناس في مدريد كقتل الناس في
We say killing people in Iraq is as criminal and terrorist an act as killing people in London or Madrid or in New York.
إذا كنت تريد أن تقاتل قوات الاحتلال جيد اذهب وقاتل قوات الاحتلال.
If somebody wants to fight occupation troops, he shall do it. But it is not permissible to kill civilians when attacking a military patrol of 2, 3 or even 10 soldiers. If today you're not in a position to carry out such an operation, then postpone it until tomorrow or to the day after tomorrow. The fight must concentrate on the military. Civilians should not pay the price.
Many Muslims make an exception only if it is about Israel. Regarding the big enemy, Hassan Nasrallah also uses an argument that blurs the difference between civilians and soldiers.
All people in Israel are reservists. If one says in Israel one distinguishes between civilians and non-civilians, one has to take a closer look.
Although Sheikh Nasrallah maintains that Israeli women and children should probably be protected as well, the difference between troops and civilians are no longer that distinct. Civilians thus lose the protection granted to them by the Quran, because according to this argument, Israelis are not really civilians. Azam Tamimi also speaks of this exception.
Every single adult in Israel serves in the army. It's a highly militarized community. In spite of that, those who go on these missions go with clear instructions, as we understand, to attack the military personnel who might be back from their bases, who might be in nightclubs, who might be on the buses, etc. But inevitably there are children who get caught in this. And the Palestinians will easily respond to criticism by saying, well, aren't the Israelis doing it to us? Aren't the Americans doing it to the Iraqis? Don't they call it collateral damage? Well, to be fair, then we'll call it collateral damage. It's a very sad situation. Civilians do pay a heavy price in all of these conflicts. But the way to do it is not to say to the Palestinians, just get killed quietly and don't respond, but to put pressure on Israel to stop its killing of the Palestinians, and hopefully the conflict will come to an end.
One side tries to blame the other. This is the nature of the conflict. But Vienna's Sheikh Adnan, who is a Palestinian himself, contradicts this. According to him, civilians are civilians and should absolutely be protected in Israel or elsewhere.
The problem is not that a person kills himself if he sacrifices himself to free his country. The danger is that something is justified that cannot be justified, that someone kills himself and the innocent as well. That is a tragedy.
The graves of the martyrs in the cemetery of Ramallah. The fight against Israel has already led to 2 changes. Suicide bombing has become Islamic, and the clear instruction to protect civilians has been softened, an argument that will set a precedent. Yet behind any fierce rhetoric and symbolism, there's the cry for peace.
I want our children to be able to go out in the evening in safety, so that families live in peace with their children. I do not believe that peace between Israel and Palestine is possible, even if they wanted it. Every mother wishes that for her children. A mother stays a mother. There are many women in Israel who have also lost their spouse or their children. They also long for peace, just like the Palestinian mothers.
From Ramallah back to France, back to the mother of the alleged terrorist, Zacarias Moussaoui.
After Zacarias had visited me in '97, he used to phone me over a long period, time and again, and all of a sudden it was over. For 3.5 years I didn't know where he was. I turned in circles crying, and then I looked at the photo, asked him, "Why did you come to ask me for forgiveness and to tell me that you'll take care of me? You broke all ties," until the moment they arrested him and I saw him on television.
Zacarias ends up in a trap and has himself recruited by Al-Qaeda. In those days, Osama bin Laden declares it the obligation of Muslims to join forces to terrorize God's enemies. In 1998, Zacarias leaves London and visits an Al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan. In 2001, he comes to Oklahoma to be trained as a pilot. There he is arrested because of a visa violation. September 11th, he spends in prison. 2 years later, Aisha El-Wafi comes to the Thames in London, however, not as a tourist. She wants to get an impression of Abu Hamza. Zacarias probably had contacts to this preacher of hatred who was arrested later. In what she hears here, the mother believes she detects the thoughts of her son. Zacarias was told, "They don't like us, they will always hate us," and that the fight, the jihad, was the only solution. When she asks Abu Hamza for help, he puts her off, telling her the son should employ a good lawyer. Afterwards, she said, "It's not about religion, it's about power."
Tous ces grands messieurs, comme on veut même Ben Laden, mais
all these important men, even Osama bin Laden, are not interested in religion but in power. All these men, they don't think of the destroyed families, they only think of power. And the young people suffering daily under racism end up in their trap. It's misery causing more misery.
Et de racisme tous les jours, ils tombent dans le panneau. Donc, voilà. Mais c'est la souffrance qui l'amène à la souffrance.
Chief correspondent Yosri Fouda was the only journalist in the world to interview both the masterminds behind the attacks of September 11th, before their arrest. Fouda tells us that the story of Al-Qaeda starts with young men who fell into a trap. Mujahideen, Muslim fighters, who had won their jihad in God's name in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union.
حادي عشر من سبتمبر أيلول بأسبوعين يحكي له نكتة مصرية.
I know firsthand that many of those guys who were actually encouraged and actually paid by the US intelligence and the Saudis to go there and kick the Soviets out of Afghanistan, they wanted to go back to wherever they came from originally, to their own countries. And they were either imprisoned, jailed and tortured, or in the first place refused entry. So where do you go from here? Especially you're now trained, and if you kill once, you might feel like doing it again. I mean, and it's jihad, and you're already indoctrinated and the rest of it. Not enough attention, I'm afraid, was given to this very crucial period of time, to this very special group of people which gathered almost from everywhere. That was the United Nations of Muslims gathering in Afghanistan, coming from everywhere. And nobody thought about trying to deal with this issue immediately after the kicking out of the Soviet Union. In my opinion, everything that happened subsequently was a result.
In his book on September 11th, Yosri Fouda characterizes the organizer Ramzi bin al-Shib as a pious Muslim. Al-Qaeda boss Osama bin Laden declared jihad on the godless USA. In 1998, he took up the Israeli argument and declared Americans were not civilians either because they paid taxes for the military. As in London, attacks on the civilian population were thus legitimized.
You will hardly come across somebody or anybody in the Arab world or in the Muslim world, bar the crazy people, who would agree on the way that bin Laden tried to express their grievings and sense of injustice. But you will hardly, on the other hand, come across anybody who would disagree with bin Laden when he talks about the Palestinian issue, when he talks about the double standards of the US foreign policy, when he talks about corrupt Arab leaders, when he talks about the Americans being on Holy Land and the rest of it. All these issues, of course Iraq, all these issues will always hit on a very sensitive chord with even mainstream Muslims and Arabs everywhere. That's the way that bin Laden and people who were around him decided to go about this.
Ayman Zawahiri, the jihad leader from Egypt, also came to Afghanistan. In 1998, he founded, together with Osama bin Laden, the International Islamic Front for fighting Zionists and Crusaders they felt attacked by.
It is very much to do with the state of mind in which Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri found themselves toward the end of the 20th century. The attempt to change the political situation in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt have utterly failed, whether through peaceful means or through violence. And then the two men came to the conclusion that the real country that is responsible for all these crises in the Muslim world is the United States of America. The United States of America, for them, represented the head of the snake. So rather than go and chase the tail, why not hit the head if you can? And this is exactly what they did. And there is so much anger in the Muslim world, so much frustration, and I don't think it was difficult at all for them to find 20, 30, 40, probably 100 people who were willing to die in order to make sure that America no longer meddles in the affairs of the Muslims.
When on September 11th, 19 terrorists strike, they are convinced they sacrifice themselves for a good cause. They're also convinced that they will be welcomed by God as martyrs. In the spiritual guideline, a pious text which is found on some of the terrorists, it says, "You carry out a deed that Allah loves and of which He approves."
The young people are certainly convinced that they will enter into paradise because of their deed. We should succeed in piercing a hole of doubt the size of a pinpoint into their conviction. They should comprehend that they might have to stay in hell forever because they killed innocent people, that the scorn of God would be on them, and that they would be dispelled from His mercy.
Zacarias Moussaoui from Narbonne in France. He met the wrong people. Personal motivation and the major questions of world politics have become too explosive a mixture. Now, the court will decide.